In Silicon Valley, power is measured in lines of code and stock value. Elijah Vance, the founder of Vance Dynamics, is a king, a god, a man who can bend the future with a snap of his fingers. But right here, in this cathedral of justice, his power is nothing but dust, because he is facing something that no algorithm can solve: the past.
Mr. Rossi, could you tell the court why he...
Unfit. That word's far too kind.
He didn't just abandon that girl. He let my sister die alone, in despair.
Wait. Hold on a minute. How could a tech billionaire, a symbol of American success, end up in this situation? Who is this woman named Isabella? And the child sitting in the back row with frightened eyes? Why is her fate at the center of such a brutal battle? This is not just a custody hearing. No. This is a battle for a man's soul. A story of a betrayal hidden for 9 long years, of a forgotten legacy, and of a truth with the power to destroy everything. In today's video, we will not stand here and judge. We will do something different together. We will turn back every page of this tragedy. Because this story didn't begin with the bang of a gavel in a courtroom. It began with a whisper, on a fateful afternoon 1 year ago. A whisper from an 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, when she saw a fallen angel on a street corner, a perfect copy of herself, but sitting in a worn-out wheelchair. In that moment, an invisible lightning bolt struck the perfect world of Elijah Vance, beginning to crack the wall of lies built by the very person he trusted most. The journey from that whisper to the cry of rage in the courtroom is a maze of secrets, tears, and irreversible choices. Come with me on this journey. Buckle up, because the answer to the 9-year-old buried mystery is about to be revealed. Right now. A year ago, San Francisco didn't greet Elijah Vance with a trial. It greeted him with a thick fog, the city's famous fog, weaving through skyscrapers and draping a hazy silver curtain over the steep hills. For Elijah, it was just a familiar backdrop to a normal Saturday. His mind wasn't on the quaint cobblestone streets of Pacific Heights. It was in Tokyo, in London, in virtual boardrooms and complex data charts. The $2,000 phone was glued to his ear, billion-dollar figures spoken with cold precision. He was a god of numbers, a perfect money-making machine. Walking beside him, his 8-year-old daughter, Chloe Vance, was in a completely different world. She wasn't looking at the luxury shops displaying expensive toys. She was looking at the condensation on the window panes, at a pigeon preening its wings, looking at the real world with clear eyes and an open heart. "Daddy, stop!" Chloe's cheerful voice cut through a command Elijah was giving to his vice president. He frowned, signaling her to be quiet. But Chloe didn't listen. She pulled hard on his sleeve, the urgency in her voice stronger than any annoyance. "Daddy, look!" Elijah sighed, ending the call in frustration. He turned to look in the direction his daughter was pointing, and that's when the machine inside him malfunctioned for the first time. On the street corner, under the awning of an abandoned building, a rugged-looking man was strumming sad chords on an old guitar. Beside him, in a wheelchair that was worn and peeling, sat a little girl. She had shimmering blonde hair, just like Chloe. She had high cheekbones, just like Chloe. And when she looked up, their eyes met through the fog, and Elijah felt a jolt of electricity run down his spine. Those eyes, a unique shade of green, deep and unusual. The eyes of his late wife, Chloe's eyes. Before Elijah could react, Chloe had let go of his hand and run across the small street. She stood in front of the wheelchair, tilting her head without a trace of fear. "Hi," Chloe said. "My name is Chloe." The girl in the wheelchair, Maya, looked surprised. She glanced at her uncle, who had stopped playing his guitar, then looked back at Chloe. "Hi, my name is Maya." "Our eyes are exactly the same," Chloe continued innocently. "You look just like me. I feel like we're family." That sentence, an innocent observation from an 8-year-old, was like a thunderclap to Elijah. He strode over, his heart pounding unusually. He stared at Maya, trying to find a logical explanation. A coincidence? An illusion created by the fog and old grief. He hurriedly pulled Chloe away, muttering an apology to the girl's uncle. But the image was seared into his mind. That night, in his penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay, Elijah couldn't work. The numbers danced meaninglessly. The financial reports were bland. All he could see were Maya's eyes, a strange copy, a reminder of a world he had deliberately forgotten. Unable to bear it any longer, he picked up the phone. On the other end was Jocelyn Pierce, his chief operating officer, the powerful and efficient woman who had been by his side since the company's early days. "Jocelyn," Elijah said, his voice dry, "I need you to check something. A former employee. Her name is Isabella Rossi." There was an almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line, a pause that lasted only half a second, but it was long enough for someone as sharp as Elijah to sense the calculation. "Isabella Rossi," Jocelyn repeated, her voice as smooth as velvet, but as cold as ice. "I remember her. A regrettable case." "What is it, Elijah? Why bring her up all of a sudden?" "I'm just curious," Elijah replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "What does her file say?" Another pause. This time, when Jocelyn answered, her voice was laced with a perfectly feigned regret. "Elijah, I'm not sure you want to hear this. Her file is sealed. The reason for termination was corporate espionage. We discovered she was trying to sell our core algorithms to a competitor. I had to handle everything quietly to protect your reputation and Vance Dynamics right after your wife passed. I didn't want to burden you further." Corporate espionage. The words hit Elijah's mind like a hammer. It explained Isabella's sudden disappearance. It was logical. It was neat. But somehow, a deep part of him, an instinct long buried by work, was screaming that something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The perfect lie had been planted, and the seed of a painful truth had just begun to sprout. Jocelyn's words were like a perfect firewall, programmed to block any intrusion. Corporate espionage. A clean, logical, and self-serving explanation. It protected the company, protected Elijah's reputation, and most importantly, it closed a troublesome chapter of the past. The CEO part of Elijah wanted to accept it. He desperately wanted to accept it, so he could return to the familiar order of numbers and deals. But the image of Maya's eyes was like a sophisticated virus that had bypassed all his defenses and was now silently corrupting his logical operating system. In the following days, Elijah became like a man possessed. He still ran meetings, still made million-dollar decisions, but his mind was elsewhere. He saw Maya's eyes in lines of code, heard Chloe's whisper in financial reports. A coincidence. He told himself that 100 times. There are 8 billion people in the world. It's entirely possible for people to look alike. But his heart, a part of him he had long neglected, refused to accept that explanation. Unable to bear the torment, late one night, when the Vance Dynamics tower had fallen silent, Elijah did something he hadn't done in nearly a decade. He went down to the server archive himself, where the brains of his empire were kept in a cold, heavily secured room. Using his supreme access, he bypassed all security protocols and began his own digital excavation. On the screen, Isabella Rossi's official file appeared, exactly as Jocelyn had described. A detailed, professionally drafted report, documented the date and time Isabella had allegedly transferred a sensitive data file to an external server. It included the digital signatures of both Jocelyn and the head of security at the time. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. But Elijah didn't stop there. He had built these systems. He knew every corner, every loophole. He accessed the raw system logs, uneditable, raw data that recorded every action on the company's network. He filtered by Isabella's name. And then he found it, a fatal anomaly, an undeniable logical error. According to the system log, Isabella Rossi's network access had been revoked at 9 a.m. on October 15th. Reason: termination of contract. But Jocelyn's report stated that the act of espionage, the fateful data transfer, had occurred at 5 p.m. on the same day. Elijah leaned back in his chair, a chill running down his spine. How could someone break into a house after their key had been confiscated? It was impossible. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. His fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for the file of the head of security who had signed that report. Marcus Thorne. Marcus's file showed he was a veteran employee who had worked for the company for 15 years with a perfect record. But 1 week after Isabella's incident, Marcus had voluntarily resigned. Attached was a severance package so generous, it was suspicious. It didn't look like a voluntary departure. It looked like hush money. The next day, Elijah didn't go to the office. He drove his luxury electric car out of glittering downtown San Francisco toward the quiet suburbs where houses weren't made of glass and steel. He found Marcus Thorne tending to his rose garden in front of a small, modest home. Marcus, now much older, became wary as soon as he recognized Elijah. He clearly wanted nothing to do with the past. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice hesitant. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." Elijah got out of his car, without the air of a powerful CEO. He came as a man searching for the truth. "Mr. Thorne, I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice low. "This isn't about the company. It's about a child, a little girl named Maya. I believe she is Isabella Rossi's daughter." At the mention of Isabella's name, Marcus's shoulders slumped. The wariness on his face was replaced by a long-hidden sadness and regret. Elijah recounted the story of the meeting on the street, of the haunting resemblance. He didn't command, didn't interrogate. He simply asked, with a genuine vulnerability in his eyes, "I need to know the truth, Marcus. What really happened that day?" Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze distant, as if looking back over 9 lost years. "I stayed silent," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "And I regret it every single day." He told him everything. He confirmed the anomaly in the system logs that Elijah had discovered. He said he had reported it to Jocelyn immediately, but instead of investigating, Jocelyn had dismissed it. "She said it was a direct order from you," Marcus recounted. "She said you wanted it handled quickly, that you didn't want any trouble after your wife's passing. She said that if I kept digging, my career would be over." That severance package. It was so my family and I could start over somewhere else and forget what I saw. Elijah stood motionless in Marcus's rose garden. Jocelyn's perfect firewall had collapsed. This was no longer suspicion. This was the truth, a raw, cruel truth. Jocelyn hadn't just covered up a problem. She had created it. She had framed an innocent woman, destroyed her life, and pushed her out of his. The question now was no longer whether Jocelyn had lied. It was why. And what role did the child with his wife's eyes play in all of this? The storm had only just begun. Elijah left Marcus Thorne's garden not as a CEO, but as a hunter. The fatigue and doubt of the past few days had vanished, replaced by the cold fire of anger and a clear objective. He didn't go back to the office. He went back to his penthouse, which had become an unofficial command center. The Elijah Vance machine had rebooted, but this time its target wasn't profit. It was the truth. Finding two people in a city of nearly 9 million is like finding a needle in a haystack. But Elijah had no intention of fumbling around. He deployed his arsenal. One phone call, and the top private investigation firm in Silicon Valley was on the case. One email, and his data analysts began silently scanning terabytes of public camera footage, using an experimental facial recognition algorithm that Vance Dynamics itself had developed. He knew this was an invasion of privacy, an ethical line he usually avoided. But now, all rules were off. All he had was a hasty photo of Maya from his phone, and the massive search engine began to work. The results came after 36 tense hours. Not from the glamorous tourist spots. The data pointed to a neighborhood that people like Elijah usually only pass through in luxury cars with tinted windows, the Tenderloin. A heat map appeared, showing that Maya and her uncle, Leo, frequently appeared at a soup kitchen and an overnight shelter. They weren't aimless ghosts. They had a pattern of life, a cycle of survival. Elijah drove there himself. His sleek black electric car looked ridiculously out of place on the grey, gritty streets, among people with tired, weathered eyes. For the first time in years, he stepped out of his filtered world. The air here had a different smell, a smell of poverty, of exhaust fumes, and of flickering hope. He felt like an alien setting foot on a foreign planet. He found them sitting on a concrete step, sharing a loaf of bread. Leo, the uncle, immediately became wary when he saw Elijah approaching. He stood up, his thin but sturdy frame blocking Maya's wheelchair, a protective reflex deeply ingrained in his blood. "What do you want?" Leo asked, his voice rough and hostile. He had met too many wealthy gawkers or social workers with empty promises. Elijah had a check ready in his pocket, a quick solution of the elite. But looking at Leo's proud and defiant eyes, he knew it was a mistake. He abandoned the idea. Instead, he chose the only path left: sincerity. He took out his phone, but not to show off. He opened a photo of Chloe, his radiant, smiling daughter. "This is Chloe, my daughter," Elijah said, his voice low and steady. He held the phone out to Leo. "The little girl you're caring for. Maya. She looks exactly like her. I believe Maya's mother was someone I once knew. Her name was Isabella Rossi. Do you know her?" The name Isabella Rossi, coming from this rich man's mouth, was like a bomb exploding the silence. The hostility on Leo's face shattered, replaced by shock, which quickly turned into pure fury. "Isabella?" Leo nearly roared. "You dare speak her name? Who are you to speak her name?" "She was your sister?" Elijah asked, his heart clenching. "Yes," Leo replied, his voice laced with bitterness. "She was everything I had. She came home one day, completely broken. They fired her, framed her for some terrible crime. She was pregnant. For months, she tried to contact you, but she never got through. Your people's doors were always slammed in her face. She told me the baby's father was a good man, just that he was grieving and didn't know she existed. She believed someone at your company was deliberately keeping you apart. She made me promise to take care of the baby if anything happened to her. Leo swallowed hard, fighting back angry tears. She died 2 years ago. Pneumonia. She had used up all her meager savings to pay for Maya's medical condition. Do you understand? She died of exhaustion and poverty, while her daughter's father was living in a golden tower. Elijah stood frozen, Leo's every word a knife in his chest. All the pieces fit. Jocelyn's setup, Isabella's disappearance. And this child, Maya, was a living legacy, the evidence of a buried tragedy. He looked down at Maya, and only now did he truly see her condition. Her legs were atrophied, her back abnormally curved. Her illness, Elijah began, his voice trailing off. Spinal muscular atrophy, Leo said, his anger giving way to despair. The doctors at the free clinic said that if she had been treated as a child, she would have had a chance. Now, they say her condition is critical. A window of opportunity was slamming shut. Elijah knew he was out of time. He looked directly into Leo's eyes, his plea replacing all his authority. Let me help, not with charity. Let me get her to the best doctors in the world. Let me find out the truth about what happened to your sister. I swear on my daughter Chloe's life, I will find justice for Isabella. Leo looked at Elijah, then down at Maya, who was listening to it all with a terrifying silence. In the young man's eyes was a fierce battle between years of rooted hatred and a fragile flicker of hope for the future of the niece he loved more than life itself. His decision, at this very moment, would change all of their fates. The air on the small street in the Tenderloin seemed to stand still. The vow of Elijah Vance, a man Leo Rossi had hated for nearly a decade, hung between them, both a sweet promise and a bitter insult. Leo clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. A part of him wanted to scream, to send this man away, to hold on to his last shred of pride and the indignation he felt for his sister. But the other, more rational part of him was looking at Maya's motionless legs, at her bleak future, a future that was closing in on her day by day. He was trapped between the past and the future, between loyalty to the dead and responsibility to the living. It was then that a soft but clear voice broke the heavy silence. It was Maya. She had been listening quietly to everything, and now she looked up at her uncle, her green eyes, so much like her mother's, shining with a strange wisdom. "Uncle Leo," she whispered. "Mom said. She said my father was a good man. She said to never give up hope." Maya's words were like the final key, unlocking the rusted door of Leo's defenses. It was Isabella's voice, her unwavering faith, echoing from the past. He had promised her he would take care of Maya. And taking care of her didn't mean letting his pride rob the girl of her last chance at life. Leo let out a long breath, a breath that carried the weight of 9 years. His shoulders slumped in a bitter defeat, but also in an acceptance. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. His eyes looked directly at Elijah, without a trace of friendliness. "Only for Maya. Only for my promise to Isabella. If you deceive us, if this is just another one of you rich people's games, I swear I will find you at the ends of the earth." Elijah nodded, an immense relief flooding his chest. "I won't," he said simply. That promise, at that moment, carried more weight than any business contract. The journey back to Elijah's penthouse was a surreal experience. The electric car glided in absolute silence, a silence that stood in stark contrast to the noise of the Tenderloin. For Maya, it was the first time she had sat on something soft and smelling of leather instead of her rigid wheelchair. She pressed her cheek against the cool glass window, watching the poor buildings recede behind them, replaced by glittering storefronts and modern architecture. The world outside the car window was like a movie she never dared to dream she'd be a part of. Leo sat stiffly in the front seat, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed forward, refusing to look at the luxury around him. He felt like a prisoner being escorted, every meter forward into Elijah's world, a betrayal of Isabella's memory. When the private elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse living room, the sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. A vast space with floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a panoramic view of the Golden Gate Bridge and the San Francisco Bay. The furniture was minimalist, cold, and sterilely perfect. This wasn't a home, it was a showroom of wealth. At that moment, Chloe ran out from a room, her blonde hair flying, her face radiant. "Dad, you found them!" she exclaimed, completely oblivious to the tension in the air. Chloe ran to Maya's wheelchair, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Hi, Maya. I knew we'd see each other again. I told Dad to get a room ready for you. It's right next to mine, with a window that looks out at the sea." Chloe's innocence and warmth were like a cool stream in a tense desert. She didn't see the difference in their clothes, didn't see the poverty. She only saw a friend, a sister. Leo stood frozen at the door, watching the scene. He saw the life Maya should have had, and a familiar wave of anger rose within him. But that anger was immediately extinguished by Chloe's smile, a smile without an ounce of calculation. While the two girls were chattering away, Elijah picked up his phone. His voice held no hesitation. It was sharp, decisive, and full of authority. "Dr. Anderson, this is Elijah Vance. Yes. Listen, I know your schedule is booked through the end of next year, but I have an absolute emergency. I don't care about the cost. I don't care about the waiting list. Arrange for a full examination tomorrow morning. I'll have my private jet pick you up. The girl's name is Maya. Yes, Maya. Vance." The last two words, Maya Vance, were spoken naturally, as if a predestined fact. Leo heard it. He looked at Elijah, the man who was now wielding all his power, not to make money, but to save a child. Elijah hung up, turned, and met Leo's gaze. He saw the two children, one in a designer dress, one in worn-out clothes, pointing out the window together, sharing a new world. The weight of 9 years of failure and a tremendous responsibility had just been placed on his shoulders. The journey of redemption had only just begun, and the road ahead was fraught with emotional thorns, truths, and wounds that needed healing. Dawn in San Francisco is a spectacular sight. The sun slowly pierces through the fog, turning the bay golden and rendering the Golden Gate Bridge a majestic silhouette. But inside Elijah's penthouse, that beauty seemed unable to touch the tense atmosphere. Sleep hadn't come easy for anyone. Leo was the first one up. He paced the vast living room like a caged animal. He looked out at the multi-million-dollar view, but his eyes held only hostility. This place, this luxury, was a constant reminder of what his sister had been deprived of. Every expensive piece of furniture, every contemporary work of art seemed to mock Isabella's hard life. Elijah couldn't sleep either. He sat in his study, surrounded by dark screens. For the first time in years, work couldn't soothe his mind. He had re-watched the security footage from the hallway last night, over and over again. The scene of Chloe placing her teddy bear next to Maya's backpack. A small gesture that carried the weight of a world he had missed. The burden of regret and responsibility weighed on him more heavily than the tech empire he had built. Only Chloe brought a little life to the morning. She tiptoed into Maya's room, holding a plate of smiley-face pancakes. Maya was awake, sitting up in bed and looking out the window, her eyes a mixture of curiosity and fear. She still hadn't dared to set foot on the soft carpet. For Maya, a safe floor was one she knew well, not something suspiciously plush. That false peace was shattered by the doorbell. Dr. Anderson had arrived. He didn't look like an ordinary doctor. Dr. David Anderson was a legend in the field of pediatric neurosurgery, a man with golden hands and an unusually calm demeanor. He entered the room, bringing with him an aura of professionalism and hope. The examination took place right in Maya's room, which was quickly transformed into a mobile clinic with the modern equipment Dr. Anderson had brought. Leo stood in a corner with his arms crossed, watching the doctor's every move with the eyes of a hawk. He trusted no one in this world, especially not people paid by Elijah. He kept interrupting, explaining Maya's seizures, the cheap medications they used to use, as if trying to prove he was the one who knew her best. Maya, throughout the process, was incredibly brave. She followed the doctor's every request, enduring the pokes and taps on her joints with a stoic silence. But her small hands, clutching the edge of the blanket, gave her away. Chloe sensed it. She quietly came and sat on the edge of the bed, saying nothing, just placing her hand over Maya's clenched fist. A silent transfer of warmth. Elijah stood at the door, feeling more superfluous and helpless than ever. He could run a corporation, dominate a market, but in this room, he was just an outsider, an observer of a pain he believed he had indirectly caused. After nearly an hour of thorough examination, Dr. Anderson invited Elijah and Leo into the living room. Chloe followed, holding Maya's hand, but then decided to stay with her sister. Dr. Anderson sat down, placing a tablet on the table. He looked directly at the two men. "I'll be blunt," he began, his voice devoid of any excess emotion. "The situation is more serious than we thought. Maya's condition, due to the lack of proper and timely intervention for years, has caused significant damage to her spinal structure. To put it bluntly, we are fighting against time and pre-existing damage." Leo tensed, his face paling. Elijah felt his heart stop. "However," Dr. Anderson continued, and the word "however" was like a faint ray of light. "There is still a path forward. It's not an easy one. It will require a series of 3 complex surgeries, interspersed with months of intensive physical therapy. It will be a long and painful process for her." "What are the chances of success?" Leo asked, his voice trembling, the question Elijah didn't dare to ask. "The chances she could walk normally?" Dr. Anderson looked at him, his eyes full of sympathy, but still very realistic. "I can't promise a miracle, but with current technology and the best team, I believe we can restore about 80% of her motor function. She will walk. She might not run marathons, but she will have a near-normal life." He paused, letting them absorb the information. "But the first surgery is the most critical and also the riskiest. Its success will determine the entire course of treatment afterward." The air in the room was heavy. This was not a solution that could be bought with money. This was a real fight, a gamble with fate. Elijah, without a moment's hesitation, spoke, his voice firm, shattering all his weakness. "Do whatever it takes. Prepare for the first surgery." That declaration was not from a CEO, but from a father. Leo looked at him, and for the first time, there was no hostility in their eyes. Instead, there was a common goal, a common enemy, and a shared love for the little girl in the next room. The foundation of a family, however complex and wounded, had begun to be built on a harsh reality. The following weeks passed in a strange state of a new normal. The penthouse, once a symbol of loneliness and work, now formed its own fragile ecosystem. Elijah's schedule no longer revolved around board meetings in Tokyo or London, but around Maya's schedule. Gentle physical therapy sessions to prepare her muscles, nutritious meals designed by a specialist, and bedtime stories. Maya slowly began to open up. Under Chloe's guidance, she started to explore the world outside her room. The two children became inseparable, creating their own universe within the vast luxury. They built pillow forts in the living room, whispered secrets under the dining table, and watched animated movies that Maya had never seen before. Chloe, with her patience and unconditional love, became the strongest bridge connecting Maya to her new life. Gradually, the old backpack was no longer clutched at all times. Occasionally, she would leave it on the bed, next to Chloe's teddy bear, a silent symbol of a trust that was slowly being built. Meanwhile, Leo struggled with his new role. He was no longer Maya's sole protector, and it made him feel useless. He wandered through the penthouse, feeling out of place among furniture whose price could have fed him and Maya for a year. He wanted to help, but didn't know how. He tried to cook the simple meals the two of them used to eat, but they looked pathetic next to the meals prepared by a private chef. He was stuck between gratitude for the medical care Maya was receiving and a simmering resentment for the world that had abandoned his sister. As for Elijah, he threw himself into caring for Maya with the same intensity he once reserved for running his company. He turned it into a critical project. He read every medical study, consulted with top experts around the world via cross-continental video calls. He even had a part of the penthouse converted into a personal rehabilitation room with the most advanced equipment. However, in personal interactions, he was still clumsy. He bought Maya expensive gifts, a complex robotics kit, the latest tablet, without realizing that what she really needed was his time, a fairy tale told in her father's voice. He was relearning how to be a father, one awkward step at a time. That fragile peace was shattered on a Tuesday morning. Elijah's phone rang with an urgent tone. On the other end was his head of communications. Her voice panicked. "Elijah, it's a disaster. The Chronicle is about to run a front-page story. Someone leaked the information." A few minutes later, the article appeared online. The sensational and cruel headline hit Elijah's eyes. Silicon Valley billionaire Elijah Vance abandoned disabled daughter for 9 years. The article, quoting a reliable internal source, painted a distorted and vicious story. It told of a heartless father, obsessed with money, who only took his daughter back after being discovered. The person behind the story was none other than Jocelyn Pierce. She had used her revenge as a weapon, turning herself into a hero who dared to expose the truth and turning Elijah into a monster. The fallout was almost immediate. Dozens of news vans lined the street below the building. Reporters with cameras and microphones swarmed the entrance. The penthouse, once a sanctuary, had become a besieged fortress. Leo, upon reading the article, lost his composure. He stormed up to Elijah, his suspicion and anger flaring violently. "I knew it. This is your world. Everything is a drama, a scandal. Now what? You've turned Maya, a child, into the centerpiece of a media circus." Leo's words were like a hammer blow, but a crueler one came from within the room. Maya, through Chloe's tablet, had seen her own face on the screen, next to the word abandoned. Her eyes widened, fear and hurt clearly visible. She quietly retreated, hugging her knees and curling up in a corner. The wall of ice that Chloe had worked so hard to melt was now reforming. Elijah's phone rang again. This time, it was the board of directors. They were panicking. The stock price was plummeting. They demanded he manage the situation, issue a press release, distance himself from the problem. Elijah stood in his office, listening to their calculated words, but his gaze was fixed on the living room. He saw Leo, though furious, awkwardly trying to shield Maya with his body. He saw Chloe quickly pulling large pillows, building a small fort around her sister, as if to protect Maya from the whole world. And in that moment, an extraordinary clarity came to Elijah's mind. He knew what truly mattered, not the stock price, not the headlines, but the small, wounded family right in front of him. He hung up mid-sentence, ignoring the shouts of protest from the other end. He walked out of his office, straight to the children's pillow fort. He knelt down, looking directly into Maya's, Leo's, and Chloe's eyes. "Listen," he said, his voice firm and clear, no longer hesitant. "There is a storm outside. Let it rage. Our world is here, in this room. No one and nothing can touch us. I am not going to manage this story." He turned to the TV, which was broadcasting the news, and turned it off. He drew the curtains, shutting them off from the camera flashes outside. "We will face this together," he continued. "But first, and most importantly, we will take care of each other." It was a declaration of war, not against the media, but against his own past. For the first time, Elijah Vance had chosen family over his empire. And in that choice, he had found his true strength. Elijah's first act after drawing the curtains was not to call his team of lawyers or crisis management experts. He did something the Elijah Vance of a week ago would never have done. He sat down on the floor, right in the middle of the pillow Fort Chloe had built, facing the members of his new family. He had turned his luxurious living room into a strategic war room, and his board members now consisted of an angry working-class man and 2 girls under the age of 10. "We need to talk," Elijah began, his voice no longer holding the distance of a CEO, but the sincerity of a father. "There are people out there telling a story about our family that isn't true. They're doing it because they're angry, or because they don't understand. We have 2 choices: stay silent and let them keep talking, or we tell our own story, our truth." He looked directly at Maya, who was still curled up in the corner. "But I won't do anything you don't want me to do, Maya. This is your story more than anyone else's. You have the right to decide." It was the first time in her life Maya had been given such power. She, whose life had always been dictated by circumstance, by illness, by poverty, now held the deciding vote. Leo looked at Elijah with skepticism. "Tell his story, or the real story of how my sister was treated." "The real story," Elijah replied, without hesitation. "All of it. My failure, Jocelyn's betrayal, Isabella's strength, and your courage, Maya." Maya was silent for a long moment. She looked at her Uncle Leo, who had always protected her. She looked at Chloe, who had given her a sense of safety. And finally, she looked at Elijah, this strange man, this father. She thought about her mother. Her mother was a strong, honest woman who never backed down from injustice. "My mom," Maya whispered, her voice still weak. She would want everyone to know the truth. The decision was made. Elijah refused all advice from his PR team. There would be no pre-written press release, no exclusive interview with a friendly journalist. He would do it his way, a live press conference, not at the glamorous headquarters of Vance Dynamics, but right here, in this very home where tragedy and hope coexisted. The plan was laid out. Elijah would present the evidence he had gathered. Leo, with Elijah's consent, would be the one to tell the story from the Rossi family's perspective. And Maya and Chloe would be present, not to answer questions, but simply to be there, as a living testament to the truth. A few hours later, the penthouse was turned into a makeshift stage. The curtains were drawn open. Dozens of journalists, who moments ago were a pack of circling vultures, were invited inside. They were stunned by the sudden turn of events. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Elijah walked out, followed by Leo. He wasn't wearing a power suit, just a simple grey sweater. He looked more like a tired father than a billionaire. He stood before a single microphone that had been set up. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice calm and clear, echoing through the silent room. "I am not here today to manage a crisis. I am here to try and right a terrible, 9-year-long wrong." Without a single excuse, he recounted everything methodically and clearly. He projected Jocelyn's falsified termination report onto a large screen next to the irrefutable system log. He told them about his conversation with Marcus Thorne. He admitted his own ignorance, his blindness due to grief, and his misplaced trust. "I failed," he said. "As a boss, and more importantly, as a human being, I do not run from that responsibility." Then he stepped back and gave the floor to Leo. Leo stepped forward. He wasn't used to public speaking, but today his pain gave him strength. His voice trembled, but it was filled with raw, honest emotion. He didn't talk about numbers or evidence. He talked about Isabella, about her smile, about how she worked 3 jobs at once to support her child and pay for her treatment. He told them about the letters she wrote to Elijah that were never sent, about the nights she cried in despair but still smiled for Maya the next morning. "My sister didn't need his money," Leo said, tears streaming down his face. "She just needed him to know his daughter existed, that's all." Leo's story gave a heart to Elijah's cold evidence. The room fell quiet, many reporters wiping away tears. Finally, a journalist asked skeptically, "Mr. Vance, it's a moving story. But why should we believe any of this?" Elijah didn't answer. He just looked toward the hallway. Chloe, with a maturity far beyond her years, pushed Maya's wheelchair forward. Maya was wearing a simple blue dress, her blonde hair neatly combed. She sat there, between Elijah and Leo. Chloe stood beside her, placing a hand on her sister's shoulder. They didn't say a word. But that image was more powerful than 1,000 words. The image of a broken family from different worlds, a billionaire, a street musician, and 2 little girls standing together, united in their truth and their pain. That was the answer. The press conference ended in a stunned silence. As the last of the journalists left, an exhaustion washed over all 4 of them. But it was a sweet exhaustion. They had faced the storm together and were still standing. Elijah's phone rang. It was his mother, Eleanor Vance. "I saw," she said curtly. "The board is going crazy. Let them—" "You did the right thing, Elijah." Elijah hung up. He looked over at Maya, and for the first time, in her green eyes, he saw not just fear or curiosity. He saw a glimmer of light, a glimmer of trust. He hadn't hidden her. He had stood with her. The foundation of their family, though built on a land of sorrow, was now stronger than ever. The media storm, though fierce, had an unexpected effect. It forged 4 strangers into a single, unified block. The judgment of the outside world had forced them to turn inward, to rely on each other for strength. Now, with the news vans gone and silence returning to the penthouse, they had to face an enemy even more daunting than the headlines, the harsh reality of medicine. The night before the surgery, the house was both quiet and heavy. There was no more awkwardness or hostility. Instead, there was a silent solidarity before a common battle. Leo no longer paced angrily. He sat beside Maya's bed, holding an old, worn photo album. He told Maya stories about her mother, about Isabella. He showed her photos of a young, always smiling Isabella, a woman whose eyes held a universe of love. "Your mom never backed down, Maya," Leo whispered. "You have her courage. Remember that." He was arming Maya with the most powerful weapon, the memory of her mother's love and strength. Elijah sat in a corner of the room, just listening. He had learned that his presence, a quiet and sincere presence, was more valuable than any expensive gift. He watched how Leo connected with Maya, and he felt a mix of pain and gratitude. He had missed all of this, but now he was given a chance to witness it, to be a part of it. Chloe, in her own way, was also preparing for the battle. She had spent the afternoon weaving a small friendship bracelet from colorful threads. She called it the Bravery Bracelet. Before Maya went to sleep, Chloe tied the bracelet around her sister's thin wrist. "Whenever you're scared, just look at this," Chloe said. "The red is for me, the blue is for Dad, and the yellow is for Uncle Leo. We are all here with you." That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She called out softly, "Daddy, Elijah?" Elijah was by her side instantly. "I'm here, sweetheart. Is it going to hurt a lot?" Her voice trembled. Elijah took her small hand. He didn't lie. "It will hurt, sweetheart, but it's a healing kind of hurt. And Dad, Uncle Leo, and your sister Chloe will be right there with you, every second. You will never have to face it alone again." That promise, sincere and solid, seemed to help Maya find peace. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, the journey to the hospital no longer had the awkward silence of the first time. They moved like a small army, with a single objective. When the nurses came to take Maya to the operating room, all four of them gathered around her. Leo held one hand. Chloe held the other, pointing to the bravery bracelet. Elijah leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'll be right here waiting for you." Maya's eyes, still fearful, now held a clear trust. The next 12 hours were the longest of Elijah's and Leo's lives. The surgical waiting room became their world, a stark, white, sterile space with the smell of antiseptic and the haunting tick of the clock. A nurse had taken Chloe to the hospital's playroom, leaving just the two men to face the wait. Elijah, the man of action, was now completely powerless. He couldn't buy time, couldn't command the outcome. He paced back and forth, constantly checking his phone but reading nothing. Leo sat motionless, fiddling with a crumpled photo of Isabella. The silence was broken by Leo himself. "She would be so proud of her," he said, his eyes still fixed on the photo. "She has her mother's courage." It was an invitation, an opening. "I just wish I had known her better," Elijah replied, his voice full of regret. "Back then, I was so lost in my own grief that I couldn't see anyone else's." And then they started to talk. For the first time, they truly talked. Elijah spoke of a gentle, caring Isabella in her role as a nurse. Leo spoke of a strong, resilient Isabella who fought against the world to protect her daughter. Two pieces of the same person, from two completely different perspectives, were slowly pieced together, forming a complete portrait. In that cold waiting room, through the memories of the woman they both loved, the two men began to forgive each other and to forgive themselves. As the clock ticked past the 13th hour, the waiting room doors swung open. Dr. Anderson walked out. He looked exhausted, the lines on his forehead deeper, but when he removed his surgical mask, there was a faint smile on his lips. Elijah and Leo shot up at the same time. Their entire world seemed to shrink, holding its breath for the doctor's words. "The surgery took longer than expected," Dr. Anderson said, his voice also tired. "There were some complications. But," that word "but" hung in the air, holding all their hopes. She pulled through. Everything was a success. The spinal cord has been decompressed. She is a true warrior. A wave of air seemed to rush back into the room. Elijah couldn't stand. He had to lean against the wall, for the first time in his life, letting hot tears stream down his face. Leo bowed his head, his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking. They said nothing, but in that moment, they shared the purest and most powerful emotion. The first battle, the most important one, had been won. The road ahead was still long, but the light at the end of the tunnel, for the first time, was clearly visible. When Maya woke up in the recovery room, her world was no longer the chaos of car horns or the cold of concrete. It was the steady beeping of life support machines, the soft glow of medical lights, and most importantly, the 4 familiar faces surrounding her bed. Leo, Chloe, and Elijah were there, their eyes sunken from lack of sleep, but sparkling with an undisguisable joy. Maya's first words weren't about the pain. She weakly lifted her small hand and touched the bravery bracelet Chloe had tied on for her. Then she looked at her uncle and whispered a single word. "Mommy." Leo understood. He took her hand. "Mommy would be so proud of you, my little warrior. She is so proud." The following months were an epic of perseverance. The road to recovery wasn't a miracle. It was a grueling battle, measured in millimeters of progress. Elijah's penthouse had truly been transformed into a personal rehabilitation center. Every day, top physical therapists would arrive to begin the arduous exercises. There were days when Maya cried in frustration as her legs refused to obey. There were days she was so tired she wanted to give up, but she was never alone. Leo became her personal trainer, her most enthusiastic cheerleader. He turned boring exercises into games, using stories of Isabella's strength to encourage her. "Your mom could lift a whole crate of oranges. Stretch a little more, sweetie," he would often say. And Maya, through her tears, would try a little harder. Chloe was the healer of the soul. When Maya was in pain, Chloe would read her adventure stories. When Maya was discouraged, Chloe would initiate games of chess or drawing contests, games they could play right from the hospital bed. She brought laughter and lightheartedness to a grueling process, and Elijah found his true role. He was no longer a CEO trying to solve problems with money. He was a father. He learned to listen. He sat for hours by Maya's side during therapy sessions, not to supervise, but to encourage. He learned how to make the hot chocolate Maya liked, how to braid Chloe's hair. Every night, reading stories to both his daughters became a sacred ritual, a peaceful time that helped him connect with his children in a way he never thought possible. And then, the small miracles began to happen. The day Maya could wiggle her toes on her own. The day she could sit up without assistance. And the most momentous day of all, with the help of parallel bars, Maya took her first step. The step was shaky, painful, but it was the step of a victor. The room erupted. Leo threw his arms around Elijah, for the first time, in a hug of pure joy and gratitude. But just as the light of hope was shining its brightest, a ghost from the past returned. Jocelyn Pierce did not accept defeat. Fired, publicly shamed, she decided to launch one final attack, an attack aimed at the very foundation of Elijah's family. One afternoon, Elijah's lawyer called with disturbing news. Jocelyn had filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against Vance Dynamics. But that wasn't all. She was suing Elijah personally for defamation, and this was the most vicious part of her plan. In her lawsuit, Jocelyn claimed that the entire story of the abandoned daughter was an elaborately staged drama. She alleged that Elijah and Isabella had a consensual affair, and that now Elijah was using the child as an actress to gain public sympathy, creating a perfect excuse to oust her from the company. To prove this setup, she demanded the court order a DNA test, not to prove paternity, but to imply that Elijah was manipulating everyone. She wanted to turn Maya's journey of healing into a hoax in the eyes of the world. Elijah received the news, but this time he didn't panic. A cold calm washed over him. He called another family meeting. He clearly explained Jocelyn's lawsuit to Leo, Chloe, and Maya. "That woman will never stop," Leo seethed, his fists clenched. "She wants to destroy all of us." His hostility was now fully directed at their common enemy. But the most surprising reaction came from Maya. The little girl, now sitting more steadily on the sofa, had listened to everything. There was no fear in her eyes anymore. Instead, there was a fire of anger and self-respect. The months of fighting physical pain had forged her spirit into steel. "She's lying," Maya said, her voice small but firm. "I'm not an actress. I am my father's daughter. Let her sue. The truth won't change." Elijah looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with immense pride. She was no longer a passive victim of circumstance. She had become a warrior. "That's right," Elijah said, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "The truth won't change. And this time, we're not just going to defend. We're going to fight." The final battle had been ignited. But this time, they were no longer broken individuals. They were a family, ready to face anything to protect their honor, their love, and the memory of Isabella. The fateful day in court finally arrived. The scene was exactly like the dramatic opening of the story, but everything was different. The atmosphere was no longer one of bewilderment, but of anticipation. The media army was still there, but this time, the Vance family walked into the courtroom not as hunted defendants, but as warriors entering an arena. Elijah was calm and steady. Leo, in a well-tailored suit, walked beside him, his eyes no longer holding hostility, but the determination of an ally. Chloe held her sister's hand tightly. And Maya, she was the center of everyone's attention. She was no longer in a wheelchair. She walked on her own, still leaning on a pair of forearm crutches, but every step exuded a hard-won pride. That image, in itself, was a statement. Across the courtroom, Jocelyn Pierce sat, her face a cold mask, confident in her ability to twist the truth. Her lawyer began, repeating the deceitful narrative of a staged conspiracy, of a father using his daughter as a PR shield. They demanded the court order a DNA test as an attack on Elijah's integrity. When it was Elijah's turn, his lawyer didn't just rebut. He began a systematic demolition. He called Marcus Thorne to the stand, who recounted the entire story of being threatened by Jocelyn. He displayed the digital evidence of the timeline discrepancy in the report, but the finishing blow, the ace up his sleeve, was yet to come. "Your Honor," Elijah's lawyer said, "we have one final piece of evidence. Evidence from the very person who can no longer speak for herself. Evidence from Isabella Rossi." The courtroom fell silent. He explained about the recovered hard drive, and then he played an audio clip. Beep, the sound of a phone connecting. "Hello?" Isabella's voice, slightly tired. "It's Jocelyn." Jocelyn's voice on the other end, cold and sharp. "I think we need to be clear. Elijah doesn't want to see you. He's rebuilding his life and doesn't want to be bothered by past mistakes." "But I just need to tell him one thing," Isabella pleaded. "It's important." "I don't care," Jocelyn cut her off. "Listen closely, Rossi. If you come near this building again, or try to contact Elijah one more time, I will make sure you never work in the medical field in this city again. Consider this a friendly warning." Beep, beep, beep. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was leaden. It was irrefutable proof. The confident mask on Jocelyn's face crumbled, replaced by a pale panic. Her drama was over. Before the judge could rule, Elijah's lawyer requested one final privilege. "Your Honor, we ask to let the true victim in this story have her voice heard." All eyes turned to Maya. She took a deep breath. Leaving her crutches with her Uncle Leo, she held onto the witness stand and pulled herself up straight. Though she trembled, she stood. Maya's voice was clear and steady, echoing through the courtroom. "I don't know much about the law," she began. "I only know about my mom. She taught me to always be honest and brave. She worked very hard to take care of me. Every night, she told me that my father was a good man and that one day he would find us." She turned, looking directly at Jocelyn, her green eyes holding not a trace of fear. "You stole my time with my father. You stole the last years of my mother's life, when she had to live in fear and desperation. You can sue, you can lie, but you can never take away the truth that this is my family." That statement, coming from a 9-year-old child who had endured so much, carried more weight than any law book. The judge summarily dismissed Jocelyn's lawsuit and recommended the district attorney's office investigate her for perjury and slander. Justice, though delayed, had been served. 1 year later, the sun was setting over Carmel Beach. The waves whispered against the shore. A cheerful guitar melody drifted from the dunes, where Leo was strumming his guitar. On the sand, 2 little girls were chasing the waves. Chloe, as always, was full of energy. And Maya, she was running. No crutches, no wheelchair. Her run might still be a little clumsy, but it was the run of freedom. Elijah stood there, watching his 2 daughters, a peaceful and contented smile on his face. He was no longer the lonely king in his tower. He was simply a father. He thought about legacy. People often seek their legacy in skyscrapers and bank account numbers. But he had learned that a true legacy lies in the footprints on the sand, in the laughter in the wind, and in the love that can heal even the deepest wounds. His legacy wasn't Vance Dynamics. His legacy was them, and that was a legacy worth fighting for to the very end.